In this video, we are going to learn about the respiratory system. Animals are organisms that belong to the domain of Eukarya and the kingdom of Animalia. All animals are multicellular eukaryotic heterotrophic organisms. Animal bodies show a hierarchical level of organization. As true with all organisms, the body of animals is made up of cells. However, different cells come together to form tissues. These cells that form the tissues usually arise from the germ layers. Now, different tissues can come together to form organs. And different organs can work together as part of an organ system. Organ systems are usually assigned specific functions that will allow the organism to survive, reproduce, and grow better. There are many types of organ systems in animals. Some of them include the nervous system, which allows the animals to perceive their environment and respond to it appropriately. The musculoskeletal system, which is a combination of the muscular and the skeletal system that can allow many animals to move. The digestive system, which allows animals to obtain nutrients from food. The circulatory system, that allows animals to transport nutrients and gases to different parts of the body. The respiratory system plays a role in gas exchange and enables the intake of oxygen and the removal of carbon dioxide at the same time from the body. The excretory or urinary system plays important roles in expelling soluble wastes from the animal body. The endocrine system uses hormones to regulate different physiological functions of the animal body. The integumentary system involves the outer part of the body like skin, feathers, hair, so on and so forth. The reproductive system that plays an important role in the formation of gametes and also in reproduction. The immune system that plays an important role in defense of the animal. There are other types of organ systems not listed here, but this is a good number of organ systems present in animals. All organisms, including multicellular organisms like animals, need energy to perform their bodily functions. The cells that the animals are made up of perform aerobic respiration in order to obtain energy, and hence they need oxygen. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen to break down organic molecules. During this process, carbon dioxide is generated as a product of respiration, and so is energy in the form of ATP. Animals need mechanisms to obtain sufficient amount of oxygen for all the cells in their body, as well as a system to dispose of the carbon dioxide that is generated in this process. And hence there is a need of a gas exchange system. The gas exchange system takes oxygen from the environment and discharges the carbon dioxide from the body back to the environment. The respiratory system that is present in animals promotes this gas exchange. Gas exchange usually occurs through the process of diffusion, and hence it does not need energy since diffusion is a passive phenomenon. The molecules normally diffuse from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Gas exchange depends on a variety of factors. One of them is the area over which diffusion takes place. The more area that is available, the more diffusion that happens. For example, if we had a surface on which we had these gas molecules and they were going to be diffusing through this surface, then we are able to see that based on the figures shown, a certain number of molecules are diffusing through. Now compare the same scenario where we have the same number of molecules. However, now the actual area over which the diffusion is occurring is less. In this phenomenon, Because there are lesser molecules associating with the surface, we have lesser molecules that are going to be diffusing through. Exchange also depends on the difference in pressure of the gas between two sides of a surface. So here we're going to take an example where there are two surfaces, and on one side there are the same number of gas molecules, but on the other side, in one scenario, there is lesser number of gas molecules than the other scenario. Where you have a higher pressure difference, there will be more diffusion of the gas through the surface. On the other hand, where there is a lesser pressure difference, we will see lesser diffusion. Distance through which diffusion occurs also influences gas exchange. If we have a thicker surface compared to a thinner surface, there is lesser diffusion across the thicker surface as the gas molecules have to cover a larger distance compared to if the surface is thinner. Animals that formed were those that belonged to the phyla of Porifera and Cnidaria. In these animals, gas exchange occurs directly in the body surface. The body surface is quite thin and can be up to 2 layers thick, and that's why gas exchange can occur directly in the cells of the body surface. Most of the body surface is in contact with water, as we can see in this figure. There is the outer part that is in contact with the extracellular water, and then there is the inner part of the cells that are in contact with water that enters the gastrovascular cavity. Oxygen thus can be taken directly from the water, and the carbon dioxide that is generated can be directly released into the water by the cells. As the organisms became more complex, there was a need to have a respiratory surface to allow this gas exchange. Different types of respiratory surfaces have evolved, which include a body surface or extension of body parts, where we had an evagination of the body part. In this case, a part of the body extends outwards. And an example of such a respiratory surface are the gills that are found in fish. Another scenario is the invagination of a body part, where a surface is created within the body. An example of such a surface is the lung. Examples of organisms that show a variety of respiratory surface include marine organisms that have gills, amphibians that use skin as their respiratory surface in addition to lungs. We have insects that use tracheae as respiratory surfaces. And then we have all the other terrestrial animals like vertebrates who use lungs. Let us first look at gills. Gills promote exchange of gases when the organism predominantly lives in water. Gills are outfoldings of the body that create a large surface area for gas exchange. The medium through which the gas exchange occurs, which is the respiratory media, is water. The water moves over the respiratory surface through a process called as ventilation. Ventilation can be achieved in two ways. In one way, the organism moves through water that allows the water to go over the gills. In another situation, the organism has evolved a mechanism to move water over their gills without having to swim through the water. In the case of the gills, the circulating fluid, like blood vessels, are usually present near the gills so that they can transport the oxygen to different parts of the body. There are many marine animals that use gills for respiration. However, the gills of fish are considered to be the most efficient. In the case of bony fish, the gills are covered with an operculum. When we look at the gills, on one side, they have the oral or the mouth cavity, which is also called as the buccal cavity, while on the other side, they have the opercular cavities. Both of these cavities function as pumps that alternately expand and in the process are able to force water to cover the gills. As the water now covers the gills, then oxygen can be removed from that water through the action of the gills. Thus, in this way, the fish do not have to be constantly swimming in order for the water to cover the gills, since they have come up with the mechanism to push water into the gills. The gills are made up of arches that are present on each side of the fish's head, and thus there are 3 to 7 gill arches on each side. Each arch is composed of 2 rows of gill filaments. The gill filaments themselves comprise of lamellae. These lamellae are thin membranous plates that are able to project into the water. They are designed in such a way that water flows past the lamellae in only one direction, which in this case we can see is going from left to right. In contact with the lamellae are an entire bed of blood vessels. These blood vessels carry blood, and the blood is able to flow in the opposite direction of the water flow. This is called as countercurrent flow. Countercurrent flow, where the blood is moving in the direction opposite to that of water, maximizes the oxygenation of blood, and hence this type of flow has been selected for evolutionarily. On the other hand, if you had concurrent exchange where both blood as well as water move in the same direction, the oxygenation of the blood is not as efficient. Gills are able to efficiently exchange gases when the medium is water, and hence they're not as effective when the medium is air. And that is why fish are unable to breathe by using gills when the environment is the air. Now, as organisms became more terrestrial, the gills were not able to sustain gas exchange and hence had to be replaced. Amphibians are animals that evolved from fish, and they exhibit a more terrestrial lifestyle compared to fish. In the case of amphibians, they're able to use skin as well as lungs for gas exchange. Since the adult amphibian is more terrestrial, gills are no longer functional for gas exchange, which required the skin and the lungs to mediate that process. For the skin to work as a respiratory surface, it has to be moist, because of which most amphibians are usually living near water bodies. Underneath the skin, there is an entire network of blood vessels that allow gas exchange. The skin is usually a thin layer, which also helps in promoting gas exchange. Insects are completely terrestrial animals, and they use tracheal systems for gas exchange. The tracheal systems are a network of branching tubes that are present throughout the body. These tracheal tubes are able to supply oxygen directly to the body cells, and hence they bypass the circulatory system. Thus, there is no need for an entire network of blood vessels to be there surrounding the tracheal tubes. And it should be remembered that in the case of insects, they don't even have a closed circulatory system. Their circulatory system is open. Now, oxygen is able to enter the tracheal tubes through openings called as spiracles. In the case of some insects, they can also have air sacs that are very close to the tracheal tubes that can store air when it becomes hot. In the case of hot environments, the spiracles tend to close in order to prevent dehydration due to water loss. The way oxygen is able to enter the body through the spiracles and move throughout the body in tracheal tubes, carbon dioxide generated by the cells of the insects can exit the body through the tracheal tubes and the spiracles. Lungs are utilized by all terrestrial vertebrates for respiration. Lungs are able to minimize evaporation of water by moving air through a branched tubular passage. Lungs normally have two lobes, and the airflow in lungs can be either one way or two way. In the case of a one way airflow, we are able to see that the fresh air is constantly present in the lungs. This phenomenon is observed in birds and is considered as a superior form of breathing because the lungs only see fresh air. In this situation, the bird inhales air and the air passes through the posterior air sacs and finally into the lung. When it is time to empty the air sac, we're able to see that the compression of the lungs pushes the air out through another path instead of what it came in. And this way, the lungs are always going to be seeing fresh air and the stale air gets immediately thrown out. In the case of a two-way airflow, which is observed in vertebrates like amphibians, reptiles, and mammals, the air does enter the lung, but then it can linger there, and when it comes to the exit, it is through the same path. And thus, we do have situations where the lung can take in fresh air, but it mixes with the stale air while it is being pushed out. This is two-way airflow. Vertebrates show different ways of breathing. In the case of frogs, positive pressure breathing is observed. In this situation, air is forced into the lungs by creating a positive pressure in the mouth or the buccal cavity. And so we're able to see that through the mouth, the frog fills its mouth up with air. And then when the time comes to exhale, it actually compresses its mouth and some air goes out, but it's able to push bulk of the air into the lungs. This is similar to blowing up a balloon, where you push air into the balloon and that causes it to expand. This is an example of positive pressure breathing. Mammals, on the other hand, show negative pressure breathing. They utilize a structure called as the diaphragm in breathing. The diaphragm aids in expanding or increasing the lung volume. When the diaphragm contracts, the muscles that are present near the lungs and the ribs also contract, and this causes the lung volume to expand or the lungs to become a little bigger. This results in air being sucked in. If you think of a syringe that has a piston, when we pull the piston outwards, we are able to see air go into the syringe. So this is a similar phenomenon that is happening. When the diaphragm relaxes, then the rib muscles also will relax, and this causes the lung volume to decrease, and thus air is then squeezed out and we exhale. Once again, if we think of our syringe and piston, if the piston is already pulled out, if we push the piston back into place, whatever air was in the syringe will be pushed out. This phenomenon is called as negative pressure breathing. In the case of mammals, there are different parts to the respiratory system. So let us look at these different parts by following the flow of air. Air is able to enter the nasal or the oral cavity. Now we usually use our nasal cavities for respiration, but the mouth or the oral cavity can also be used. The air that is inhaled passes through the larynx, which is also called as the voice box. It is in the larynx that we have vocal cords that allow us to speak. The air then enters into the trachea, which is a tube-like structure. And from the trachea, the air can enter into any of two bronchi. We have two bronchi, and thus the air can go into any one of these two. The bronchi, on the other hand, branch into structures called as bronchioles. The bronchiole open into alveoli, which are also known as air sacs. There are millions of alveoli that are present in lungs, and each alveolus is surrounded by an extensive capillary network where blood flows. Gas exchange occurs in these capillaries that are lining the alveoli through the process of diffusion. Oxygen is able to diffuse through a moist film of the alveolar epithelium into the capillaries. Thus, the oxygen that is in the air that was inhaled can now enter into the capillaries. The carbon dioxide that is being carried in the blood of these capillaries in turn diffuses out, crosses the epithelium, and enters into the alveoli. The exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide is driven by a difference in the partial pressure of these gases. Let us first look at oxygen transport and diffusion. The partial pressure of oxygen in the air that is inhaled is larger than the partial pressure of carbon dioxide that is present in that inhaled air. On the other hand, when we look at the blood that is entering the alveolar capillaries, the partial pressure of oxygen is much lower than that is present in the alveolar space. This drives the oxygen to leave the alveolar space and enter into the alveolar capillaries. The oxygenated blood, on the other hand, goes to the heart, and then from the heart, it will be pumped to different parts of the body through arteries. The partial pressure of oxygen present in the capillaries that are close to body tissues is much less than the partial pressure of oxygen that is in the blood going through the arteries. This difference in the partial pressure of oxygens causes oxygen to leave the blood that's present in these capillaries and enter into the cells present in the tissues. Thus, the difference in the partial pressure of oxygen promotes the diffusion of the oxygen into the appropriate places in the body. Once the oxygen leaves the blood, the deoxygenated blood can now go back to the heart through veins. The oxygen can be transported in the circulatory system with the help of proteins. These proteins or respiratory pigments can have copper ions that bind to oxygen and mediate transport. An example of such a protein is hemocyanin that is present in mollusks and insects. We do have respiratory pigments that use iron in order to form complexes with oxygen. Common examples are hemoglobin that is found in vertebrates and hemerythrin that is found in some invertebrates, especially those that are present in marine environments. Hemoglobin is the protein that is present in erythrocytes or red blood cells of vertebrates found in blood. It is made up of 4 polypeptides, and each polypeptide contains a heme group. Thus, there are 4 heme groups in hemoglobin that are able to bind to oxygen. Hemoglobin is able to carry 4 oxygen molecules, and in such a state, it is called as oxyhemoglobin. In fact, hemoglobin bound to oxygen is the one that actually makes the blood look red. Carbon dioxide is produced by cells as part of their normal metabolic activities, including aerobic respiration. This carbon dioxide has to be transported back to the lungs so that it can be expelled. When we look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide present in the blood that is in arteries, it is less than what we can see present in body tissues. There is a slightly higher partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the body tissues than what is there in the capillaries that is bringing the blood to the body tissues. This causes the carbon dioxide to leave the body tissues and enter into the blood. Once the carbon dioxide enters the blood, most of it diffuses into erythrocytes and forms carbonic acid. This carbonic acid usually breaks down to give bicarbonate ions and H+ ions, which can cause the blood to start becoming slightly acidic if the carbon dioxide is not removed. Small amounts of carbon dioxide can also be transported by hemoglobin that is present in blood. But this is really a very small portion of the overall carbon dioxide that is made. The pressure difference of carbon dioxide in the lungs will promote the diffusion. So if we look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide that is in the veins that is going to the lungs, we're able to see that it is definitely slightly higher than the carbon dioxide partial pressure present in the air in the alveolar space. This difference causes a net diffusion of carbon dioxide out of the capillaries present in the alveolar spaces and into the alveolar space where the air is. This air will eventually be expelled by the lungs when we exhale. Different aspects of respiration are controlled by the medulla oblongata in the brain. The medulla oblongata can regulate the rate as well as the depth of breathing, and it is able to do so in response to different factors, like changes of pH in the cerebrospinal fluid that is in its vicinity, or obtaining signals from different breathing sensors that are present in blood vessels. Depending on the kind of signals that it gets, it is able to signal the muscles that are present in the lungs in order to control the breathing. And thus, the medulla oblongata is able to regulate not only the rate, but as well as the depth of breathing. With this, we come to the end of our talk, where we learned about the evolution of the respiratory system and the different types as well as features of respiratory systems found in different types of animals, including vertebrates. We also learned about the different parts of the mammalian respiratory system and how gas exchange occurs. We looked at the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide and the role of respiratory pigments in this process. We finally saw how different portions of the brain are able to regulate breathing depending on cues that it gets from different body parts.